Just under 800 years ago, in the midst of a dark and gloomy Icelandic winter, a story was written down. This marked a significant moment in history, as it was one of the first times that oral Viking traditions were preserved in writing, ensuring their survival through centuries and enabling us to glimpse into the myths, legends, and culture of the Norse people. The tale had already been told for hundreds of years. It talked of myths and monsters, but great heroes too. And now, because of the revolutionary new literary traditions sweeping through Iceland, it would be recorded in its current state for posterity. From Greenland to the Mediterranean, all across the Viking world up until the 1200s, the story had been memorized by one generation of poets after another, becoming one of the most popular and long-lasting of all. The story is still being retold today, the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. But is there any truth to the tale? Let's find out. In the year 814, the great king Charlemagne, ruler of the largest empire in Western Europe since the fall of Rome, was dead. In the wake of his death, his once prosperous realm soon devolved into civil war between his descendants. In some of the other states that filled the void left by the Romans, such as in Visigothic Spain and Ostrogothic Italy, the Roman tradition of giving hereditary inheritance to one son had become the norm. This wasn't the case for the Franks. They continued their ancient tradition of dividing up an inheritance between sons, a tradition that had plagued them for centuries by fragmenting their kingdom into smaller, weaker states. This lack of unity made it difficult to defend against external threats, such as Viking incursions, and allowed rival powers to exploit internal divisions. When the dust from the succession finally settled, all of Charlemagne's hard work had been undone largely through the actions of his own descendants. Three distinct kingdoms were born. East Francia, the state that would eventually go on to become Germany. Lotharingia, a realm that would eventually be absorbed by the other two kingdoms. West Francia, the kingdom that would eventually become France. It was here, under the rule of Louis the Pious and his descendant Charles the Bald, that a distinct lack of centralized power would increasingly be capitalized upon by a new force. For years, the Franks had pushed ever onwards to the pagan north to conquer new lands and bring more people into the Christian fold. And now, a reckoning was on the way. At first, they came in trickles, just handfuls of boats trying their luck. But as the years dragged on, ever larger waves of piratical sea raiders came flooding down from the unforgiving north. The Viking Age had begun. Frankish sources of the time mention Horik, the king of the Danes. He was likely just one Danish king amongst many, and he was being undermined by the West Frankish king, Louis the Pious. Louis had supported a rival claimant to Horik's throne, Harald Klak, in a struggle to overthrow him. Whilst this policy of divide and rule might have worked under the strong hand of Charlemagne, whose elite army might have made light work of the piratical newcomers from the north, standards had slipped over the years, and the Frankish army was now a mere shadow of its former self. After Horik successfully fought off the attacks from his rival, the full ferocity of the Northmen was about to come crashing down catastrophically upon Louis's head. First in the form of small fleets, and later in the form of a powerful and influential warlord who would smash his way onto the scene over the coming years. If the legends and stories later told about his life even bear any resemblance to the truth, then he was one of the first examples of a sea king during the Viking Age, and certainly one of the most memorable. Ragnar Lothbrok had arrived. Since the end of the Saxon Wars of the late 8th century, Scandinavian raids had been conducted into Francia. Those wars had been a long and drawn-out conflict against the inhabitants of Old Saxony, the still pagan land immediately to the south of Denmark. They had ended in the forced conversion or death of much of its inhabitants. It was after this 30-year-long evangelizing crusade that the Franks first came into direct contact with the inhabitants of Denmark. Though the reputation of the Franks had almost certainly preceded them, as long as the emperor lived, Europe remained largely safe. According to Charlemagne's biographer Einhard, writing just a handful of years later, the only places looted and sacked during his lifetime were certain islands off the coast of Frisia, near to the German coast. He even set up squadrons of coast guards to defend the river systems. After his death, all this was to change. With no strong-handed, powerful ruler to lead it, Charlemagne's empire quickly unraveled. Within just a few years, Danes moved in like carrion to pick at the corpse. Squadrons of 30 or 40 opportunistic ships became common throughout the 810s and 820s, and they met with significant success by raiding remote and lightly populated areas on the peripheries of the West Frankish coastline. By the 830s, however, these fleets began to consist of tens of vessels, and as word traveled of the successes they found, they increasingly tested their luck against larger and larger targets. They sacked the silver minting center of Dorestad in 834, 835, and 836, and plundered the trading town of Walcheren in 837. On the face of it, King Horik seems to have disapproved of these raids, which he publicly condemned in letters to Charlemagne's successor, Louis the Pious. Though this could easily have been a ruse, it does suggest that in reality, King Horik held little power over the increasingly unruly and ambitious warlords of Denmark. In 845, an entirely new breed of army arrived on the continent. Not just tens of vessels, but a fleet of hundreds, crammed full with as many as 5,000 Viking warriors. Where this fleet came from is anyone's guess, but according to the Frankish sources, it was led by a man named Regin Harris, a figure who a number of modern scholars associate with the most famous Viking of all, Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar's legacy lives on, not only through his supposed sons, Ivar the Boneless, Björn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and others, but also through the enduring sagas that have captivated audiences for centuries. These stories have shaped modern perceptions of Viking culture, emphasizing their seafaring prowess, warrior ethos, and complex mythologies. Ragnar has become a cultural symbol, inspiring works of literature, film, and television that continue to define our fascination with the Viking Age. Whether he was a real historical figure or a composite of several Viking leaders, Ragnar Lothbrok remains one of the most iconic characters of the Viking Age, a symbol of the ferocity and ambition that defined the era. Ragnar Lothbrok's story is a fascinating blend of myth and history, where fact and fiction intertwine to create a legendary figure that continues to inspire us today. Whether he was a real Viking warlord or a composite of many, one thing is clear. His name will forever echo through the ages as a symbol of ambition, resilience, and daring. Want to dive deeper into the lives of legendary figures like Ragnar? Subscribe now and join us as we uncover more hidden truths and untold stories from history. Don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts. Who knows, your favorite legend might just feature in our next video.